Daniel Milton was 34 years old, and the moment his mother-in-law's palm connected with his face in front of 20 dinner guests, he knew his marriage was about to implode. The sharp crack echoed through the dining room of what she believed was her daughter's house. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every brick, every beam, every square inch of the property she was demanding he leave belonged to him. "Get out!" Margaret Sullivan's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. Her manicured hand was still raised, trembling with rage, her face flushed crimson. "Give me those keys right now, you freeloading parasite. My daughter deserves better than some nobody who can't even afford to take her out to a decent restaurant." The keys in question hung on a hook by the kitchen entrance. The same keys Daniel had held the day he closed on this four-bedroom colonial in Westchester County 3 years ago. Before he'd even met her daughter, before he'd made the biggest mistake of his life by not being completely honest about his financial situation. Daniel touched his burning cheek, tasting blood where his tooth had cut the inside of his mouth. Around them, Rachel's college friends, her co-workers from the marketing firm, and several of Margaret's country club associates sat frozen, wine glasses suspended midair, forks hovering over their anniversary dinner plates. His wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, he was certain, stood behind her mother, her face unreadable. "Mom, please," Rachel started, but Margaret silenced her with a look. "No, sweetheart. I've watched this man take advantage of you for 2 years, living in your house rent-free, driving your car, spending your money. It ends tonight." She turned back to Daniel, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light from the chandelier he'd installed himself. "I've already spoken with my attorney. You have until Monday to vacate the premises, or I'll have you removed. The thing about revenge is that it's most satisfying when it's deserved. And Margaret Sullivan, with her designer clothes and her assumption that everyone around her was inferior, had earned every bit of what was coming. If you enjoy stories of sweet, calm revenge, shocking family secrets, injustice against the people that look less on other people and people who are always entitled, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one. And tell me where you are watching from. Daniel needed to explain how he'd gotten here, how a senior software engineer pulling in a comfortable six-figure salary had somehow been cast as a broke freeloader in his own home. The story started 2 years earlier, in the summer of 2022, when he'd met Rachel Sullivan at a mutual friend's barbecue in White Plains. She'd been funny, sharp-witted, and refreshingly down-to-earth for someone who'd grown up with a trust fund. Rachel worked in marketing. She genuinely worked, not the pretend jobs some wealthy kids took to seem productive. She was good at what she did, earning around $75,000 a year at a mid-sized digital agency. Daniel had been immediately drawn to her lack of pretension. Their first date had been at a small Italian place near the Hudson River. Nothing fancy, just good pasta and better conversation. Daniel had offered to pay, and Rachel had insisted on splitting the check. He'd found it charming. What he didn't realize was that this small gesture would set the tone for a massive misunderstanding that would define their entire relationship. Daniel had bought his house in 2019, right before the market exploded. He'd gotten it for $420,000, a steal even then, by buying directly from an elderly couple who wanted to avoid realtor fees. The place had needed work, but Daniel had always been handy. Over 3 years, he'd renovated it himself, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos, spending weekends retiling bathrooms and refinishing hardwood floors. By the time he met Rachel, the house was worth close to $700,000, and he owned it outright. But Daniel had never mentioned it. Not on the first date, not on the 10th. He'd been burned before by women who were more interested in his assets than in him. His previous relationship had ended badly when he discovered his girlfriend was already planning how to redecorate their house before he'd even proposed. So with Rachel, he'd been cautious. He drove his 7-year-old Honda Civic to dates. He suggested affordable restaurants. He let her believe he was just another guy living paycheck to paycheck in expensive Westchester County. The irony was that Rachel had done the same thing in reverse. She rarely mentioned her family's wealth, never name-dropped the country clubs or the vacation homes. She split checks and shopped at Target. For the first 6 months of their relationship, they'd both thought they were dating someone in their own income bracket. The truth had started to emerge slowly. Daniel had been at Rachel's apartment one evening when Margaret called. He'd heard Rachel's side of the conversation. "Mom, I don't need you to co-sign anything. Yes, I know you want to help. I'm doing fine on my own." After she hung up, Rachel had seemed embarrassed. "My mother thinks I can't take care of myself," she'd explained. "She's always trying to buy things for me or manage my money. It's suffocating." Daniel had understood. He'd squeezed her hand and said, "You're doing great. You don't need anyone's help." He'd meant it as support. Rachel had heard it as solidarity between two people struggling to make it in an expensive area. The misunderstanding had calcified from there. When Daniel finally invited Rachel to his place 4 months into their relationship, he'd downplayed it. "It's nothing special," he'd said, "but it's home." Rachel had walked through the front door and stopped. The house was beautiful. Exposed brick in the living room, a chef's kitchen with custom cabinets Daniel had built, a backyard with a deck overlooking a wooded lot. She'd turned to him with wide eyes. "Daniel, this place is incredible. How much is your rent?" And there it was, the moment he should have corrected her. Instead, he'd shrugged and said, "I got lucky with the landlord. He keeps it reasonable." Why hadn't he told her the truth? Pride, maybe. Or the fear that once she knew he had money, everything would change. He'd seen how her mother had treated the staff at a restaurant they'd gone to for Rachel's birthday. Dismissive, condescending, as if their service was something she was owed rather than something to be appreciated. He hadn't wanted Rachel to see him through that same lens of wealth and status. But by not telling her, he'd created something worse. He let her believe she was the successful one, the responsible one, the one holding things together financially. And Rachel, wanting to be that person, had leaned into it. They'd gotten married in a small ceremony in November 2022. Margaret had insisted on paying for everything, and Daniel hadn't fought it. The wedding had been elegant, but not ostentatious. Rachel's influence keeping her mother's instincts toward excess in check. Daniel's family had attended. His parents, who'd immigrated from Taiwan in the 90s and ran a small accounting firm in Queens. His sister, a high school teacher in New Jersey. His uncle, who owned a chain of 3 Chinese restaurants in Brooklyn. They were comfortable, successful people, but not wealthy by Margaret's standards. Margaret had been polite to them at the wedding, but distant. Daniel had overheard her telling one of her friends, "At least the boy seems to work hard. Rachel could have done worse." The boy, he'd been 32 years old with a master's degree in computer science and a decade of experience in software engineering. But to Margaret, anyone who didn't summer in the Hamptons was basically the help. After the wedding, Rachel had suggested Daniel move into her house. He'd agreed, not correcting her assumption of ownership, and they'd settled into married life. Daniel had continued his work. He was a senior engineer at a fintech company in Manhattan, leading a team of 6 developers working on security protocols. His salary was $140,000, with annual bonuses that typically added another $20,000 to $30,000. He was doing well by any objective measure, but he'd continued to let Rachel pay for things. Groceries, utilities, dinners out. She'd insisted, saying she made good money and wanted to contribute. Daniel, trapped in the web of his own deception, had let her. He'd been funneling his own money into investments, into a renovation fund for a rental property he was considering, into retirement accounts. All invisible to Rachel, all reinforcing her belief that she was supporting them both. Margaret had picked up on the dynamic immediately. She'd seen her daughter paying for everything and drawn her own conclusions. During family dinners at the Sullivan estate in Connecticut, she'd made pointed comments. "Rachel, darling, I saw that transaction on your account. Another mortgage payment? You work so hard." Daniel had opened his mouth to correct her, but Rachel had spoken first. "It's fine, Mom. We're partners. We share everything." They'd shared everything except the truth. And now, 2 years into their marriage, that truth was about to detonate like a bomb in the middle of their anniversary dinner. The dinner had been Rachel's idea, a small gathering to celebrate 2 years of marriage. She'd invited her closest friends and, against Daniel's quiet objections, her mother. Margaret had arrived with her sister Patricia, both women dripping in jewelry and judgment. The evening had started pleasantly enough. Daniel had grilled steaks on the deck, a deck he'd built with his own hands using pressure-treated lumber in marine-grade stainless steel hardware. The guests had complimented the house, the food, the ambiance. Margaret had smiled tightly and said nothing. Then over dessert, Rachel's friend Melanie had asked about their plans to start a family. "We're thinking about it," Rachel had said, glancing at Daniel with a warm smile. "But we want to be financially stable first, maybe in another year or two, once we've saved more." Margaret's wine glass had hit the table with more force than necessary. "Saved more? Rachel, sweetheart, you don't need to save. Your father and I have more than enough to help you when the time comes. We could buy you a bigger house, set up trust funds for the children. You shouldn't have to wait because," she gestured vaguely at Daniel, "because of limitations." Daniel had felt his jaw tighten, but Rachel had handled it. "Mom, we want to do this ourselves. Daniel and I are building our life together. We don't need handouts." "It's not a handout when it's family money," Margaret had countered. "It's an inheritance, an investment in your future. Your future, Rachel. You shouldn't have to carry the financial burden alone." "I'm not carrying anything alone," Rachel had said, her voice developing an edge. "We're equal partners." Margaret had laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Equal? Darling, you've been supporting this household for 2 years. I've seen your bank statements, every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every grocery receipt. You're the one working to keep this home running while your husband—" The word had dripped with contempt. "Does what exactly?" Daniel had spoken then, his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. "Margaret, I think you've misunderstood the situation." "Have I?" She'd turned to him, her eyes cold. "Then please, enlighten me. What exactly do you contribute to my daughter's life besides taking up space in her house?" Her house. Those words had hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel had looked at Rachel, hoping she would say something, correct her mother's assumptions. But Rachel had been staring at her plate, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, that's enough," she'd said quietly. "This isn't appropriate dinner conversation." "Appropriate?" Margaret's voice had risen. "What's not appropriate is watching my daughter work herself to exhaustion to support a man who can't even provide basic financial security." "I've been patient, Rachel. I've watched and waited, hoping he would step up, prove me wrong. But here we are, 2 years later, and you're still paying for everything while he coasts along on your generosity." Patricia, Margaret's sister, had nodded along. "Your mother's just looking out for you, dear. Sometimes we need to hear hard truths." Daniel had stood up then, his hands flat on the table. "I think it's time we ended this dinner." "Oh, I agree," Margaret had said, standing as well. "In fact, I think it's time we ended more than just the dinner. Rachel deserves a fresh start, and she's not going to get it while you're leeching off her success." That's when Rachel had finally looked up, her eyes wide. "Mom, stop. You're crossing a line." "Someone needs to," Margaret had shot back. "If you won't protect yourself, I will. I've already called Gerald. You remember Gerald Marcus, my attorney? He's prepared to file eviction paperwork first thing Monday morning." The other guests had started gathering their things, murmuring awkward goodbyes, desperate to escape the confrontation. Daniel had remained standing, his mind racing through options, through consequences, through the revelation he'd been avoiding for 2 years. "You can't evict me," he'd said quietly. "This isn't your decision to make." "It absolutely is," Margaret had replied. "Rachel is too kind-hearted to do what needs to be done, so I'm doing it for her. My daughter owns this house, and I'm ensuring she reclaims it from someone who's taken advantage of her goodness for far too long." "Mom," Rachel had said, her voice stronger now, "you can't just—" "I can, and I will. Gerald assures me the process is straightforward. Daniel has no lease, no rental agreement, nothing protecting him. He's essentially a squatter in your home, Rachel. We'll have him out by the end of the month." That's when Daniel had made a decision. He could have let it go, could have pulled Rachel aside later and explained everything in private, could have tried to salvage what was left of their marriage away from her mother's toxic influence. But something about Margaret's absolute certainty, her complete conviction that she was rescuing her daughter from a worthless man, had ignited something cold and final in his chest. "There's something you should know," he'd said, "about the house." "What about it?" Margaret had snapped. That you've been living here rent-free for 2 years? We're all quite aware. No, Daniel had replied. About who owns it? Margaret had waved a dismissive hand. Rachel owns it. She's been making the mortgage payments. I've seen the bank statements. Rachel's been making mortgage payments, Daniel had agreed, but not on this house. The room had gone very quiet. Rachel had looked up at him, confusion creasing her forehead. What do you mean? Daniel had pulled out his phone, navigating to his documents folder. I mean that there is no mortgage on this house. I paid it off in 2019. I've owned it free and clear for 5 years. He'd held up the phone, showing the deed with his name printed clearly at the top. Margaret had snatched the phone from his hand, her face contorting as she'd scrolled through the document. This is fake, she'd hissed. Some kind of forgery you've created to... It's registered with the county, Daniel had interrupted. You can verify it yourself. The house at 247 Willow Creek Drive, Westchester County, New York. Owner, Daniel Milton. Purchased August 2019 for $420,000. Current market value approximately $700,000. Rachel had stood up slowly, her face pale. Daniel, what is he talking about? We make mortgage payments every month. I write the check myself. You write a check to Westchester Property Management, Daniel had said gently. It's a rental property I own on the other side of town. A small duplex I bought as an investment last year. You've been helping pay that mortgage, yes. But this house, our house, has been mine long before we met. Margaret's face had transformed from confusion to rage in seconds. The slap had come without warning, her palm connecting with Daniel's cheek with enough force to snap his head sideways. The remaining guests had gasped, frozen in their seats. You manipulative bastard, Margaret had snarled. You let my daughter believe she was supporting you. You let her pay your bills while you, what? Laughed at her behind her back. Daniel had touched his burning cheek, tasting blood. I never laughed at anyone. And Rachel hasn't paid any of my bills. She's been paying rent on an investment property that will generate income for both of us. Get out, Margaret had shrieked. Give me those keys right now. I don't care whose name is on some piece of paper. My daughter deserves better than a liar and a con artist. And there they were, full circle to the moment that would change everything. Daniel looked at Rachel, trying to read her expression, trying to understand what she was thinking, but his wife's face had gone completely blank, shock erasing every other emotion. Rachel, he'd said quietly, we need to talk. Alone. No, Margaret had interjected. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of me. I'm not leaving my daughter alone with someone who's been deceiving her for 2 years. Daniel had felt something shift inside him. For 2 years, he'd avoided confrontation, had let misunderstandings compound, had chosen peace over honesty. But peace built on deception wasn't peace at all. It was just postponed conflict. And the conflict had finally arrived. What Margaret Sullivan didn't know, what she was about to learn, was that Daniel Milton hadn't built his life by coasting on anyone's generosity. He'd built it through careful planning, hard work, and strategic thinking. And those same qualities that had earned him his house, his career, and his financial security were about to be turned toward one very specific goal: ensuring that no one, least of all his mother-in-law, would ever disrespect him in his own home again. The guests were gone now, having fled as soon as the slap landed. Only Margaret, Patricia, Rachel, and Daniel remained in the dining room. The anniversary dinner lay forgotten on the table, candles still burning, wine glasses still full. The scene should have been celebratory. Instead, it looked like the aftermath of a bombing. I want you to leave, Margaret repeated, her voice icy now, controlled. Pack your things tonight. Rachel will change the locks tomorrow. Daniel looked at his wife. Rachel, is that what you want? Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands were shaking. I need to understand what's happening. You own this house? You've owned it the whole time? Yes. And you let me think. You let me believe I was taking care of us financially? I did, Daniel admitted. And that was wrong. But I never took your money, Rachel. Every penny you've spent has gone toward building our shared assets. The duplex generates $2,000 a month in rental income. That's our money together. Our money? Margaret laughed harshly. You mean your money, acquired through deception. Rachel, don't you see what he's done? He's been playing poor to manipulate you, to make you feel needed while he builds his own little empire in the shadows. Daniel turned to Margaret. With all due respect, which at this point is none, you don't know anything about my relationship with your daughter. You've made assumptions based on your own prejudices about people you consider beneath you. Prejudices? Margaret's eyes flashed. I've watched you live off my daughter's labor for 2 years. You've watched your daughter contribute to a partnership while I did the same, Daniel corrected. The difference is, my contributions weren't visible to you because you never bothered to look beyond your own assumptions. You saw a man who drove an old car and didn't flash wealth, and you immediately classified him as worthless. Mom, Rachel said, her voice trembling, can you please just give us a moment? I'm not leaving you alone with him, Margaret insisted. I'm 30 years old, Rachel snapped, sudden fire in her voice. I can handle a conversation with my own husband without supervision. Margaret looked shocked. Rachel rarely contradicted her directly, especially not in front of other people. Patricia placed a hand on her sister's arm. Maybe we should wait outside, Patricia suggested softly. Let them talk. Margaret's jaw worked, but she nodded stiffly. Fine, but we're not leaving this house. We'll be in the front hallway, she pointed at Daniel. And you should know that Gerald can still make your life very difficult, regardless of whose name is on the deed. Fraud is fraud. There's no fraud, Daniel said evenly. But feel free to call your attorney. I'd be happy to speak with him. Margaret swept out of the room, Patricia following. The moment they were gone, Rachel sank into her chair, her head in her hands. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years, Daniel. How could you not tell me? Daniel sat down across from her. Because I'm an idiot. Because I was scared. Because every relationship I'd had before you ended the moment women found out I had money. They'd start planning our future before we'd even build a present. They'd see a house and savings, not a person. So you decided to lie instead. I didn't lie. I just didn't correct your assumptions. That's the same thing. Rachel looked up, and her eyes were wet. I stood there month after month, paying bills I thought were keeping us afloat. I worried about our future, about how we'd afford kids or emergencies. I felt like I was holding everything together. And you just let me feel that way? You were holding things together, Daniel said, just not in the way you thought. The duplex needed a down payment of $60,000. Your mortgage payments on that property meant I didn't have to liquidate investments? That's partnership, Rachel. That's teamwork. No, Rachel said sharply. Partnership is honesty. Teamwork is transparency. What you did was, I don't even know what to call it. They sat in silence. Outside, Daniel could hear Margaret's voice in the hallway, sharp and insistent as she spoke on the phone. Probably calling her attorney despite the late hour. Daniel didn't care. Let her call. Let her try to weaponize lawyers and money and social connections. He'd been poor once, had grown up watching his parents build their accounting firm from nothing, had learned that real security came from knowledge and preparation, not from flashy displays of wealth. What happens now? Rachel asked finally. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. The woman he'd fallen in love with at that barbecue 2 years ago. The woman who'd been kind and funny and real. She was still there, underneath the hurt and betrayal. But something had broken between them, and he didn't know if it could be repaired. That depends, he said slowly, on what you want to happen. Rachel laughed, a broken sound. I don't know what I want. 2 hours ago, I thought I was celebrating our anniversary with my husband. Now I find out my whole marriage has been based on a lie. Not a lie, a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake that I've been too afraid to correct. Why tonight? Rachel demanded. Why did you finally tell the truth tonight? Daniel gestured toward the hallway where Margaret was still on the phone. Because your mother slapped me in the face and called me a parasite in front of our friends. Because she threatened to have me evicted from my own home. Because I realized that letting misunderstandings persist doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the inevitable explosion. So this is my mother's fault? No, Daniel said firmly. This is my fault. I should have been honest from the beginning. I should have trusted you enough to know you'd love me regardless of my bank balance. But your mother, she's not blameless either, Rachel. The way she treats people she considers beneath her, the assumptions she makes, the contempt she showed tonight, that's on her. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I need time. I need to think about all of this without you or my mother or anyone else telling me what to feel. Daniel nodded. That's fair. Do you want me to stay somewhere else tonight? Yes, Rachel said. Please. He stood up, pulling his car keys from his pocket. Not the house keys Margaret had demanded. Those were staying exactly where they were. I'll go to a hotel, but Rachel, this house is mine legally. Your mother can't change that, no matter how many attorneys she calls. If you want me to leave permanently, that's your choice. But it's your choice, not hers. I know, Rachel said quietly. And that's what I need to figure out. What I actually want versus what everyone else thinks I should want. Daniel walked to the front hallway. Margaret was off the phone now, her face triumphant. Gerald is drawing up papers, she announced. We'll have you out of here by… No, you won't, Daniel interrupted calmly, because Gerald is a smart enough attorney to know you can't evict someone from their own property. But please, feel free to try. I'm sure the courts would find it fascinating. He walked past her to the door, then paused. Rachel needs space tonight. I'd appreciate it if you'd respect that and leave her alone. You don't tell me what to do with my daughter, Margaret hissed. I'm not, Daniel replied. I'm asking you, as someone who allegedly cares about her well-being, to give her room to think. But something tells me that's not really your priority, is it? Your priority is being right, being in control, being the hero who saves her daughter from the big bad con artist. Margaret's face flushed with rage, but before she could respond, Rachel appeared in the doorway behind them. Both of you stop, she said wearily. Mom, I love you, but Daniel's right. I need space. Please go home. Rachel, sweetheart, I'm not leaving you here. I'm not asking, Rachel said, her voice hardening. I'm telling you. Go home. I'll call you tomorrow. Margaret looked between her daughter and Daniel, her mouth working soundlessly. Finally, she nodded stiffly. Fine, but I'm only a phone call away if you need me. Remember that. She and Patricia gathered their coats and left. Daniel waited until he heard their Mercedes pull away from the driveway before turning back to Rachel. For what it's worth, he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't honest. I'm sorry I let things get this far. And I'm sorry your anniversary dinner ended like this. Rachel's expression was unreadable. Me too, she said. Then she closed the door. Daniel stood on the porch of his own house, locked out by his own deception. The irony wasn't lost on him. He walked to his Honda Civic, the car he'd kept driving even though he could easily afford something nicer, and drove toward the nearest hotel. Behind him, lights glowed in the windows of the home he'd built, renovated, and poured his heart into. The home where his wife now sat alone, trying to piece together which parts of their marriage had been real and which had been carefully maintained illusions. Daniel didn't know if Rachel would forgive him. He didn't know if their marriage would survive this. But he did know one thing with absolute certainty. Margaret Sullivan's campaign to paint him as a worthless freeloader was about to backfire spectacularly. Because Daniel Milton hadn't just been building a house and a career these past years. He'd been building a life. And no one, not his mother-in-law, not her attorneys, not anyone, was going to take that from him without a fight. They had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn. Daniel checked into a Hampton Inn off Route 287, a mid-tier hotel that cost him $98 for the night. The irony of sleeping in a hotel room when he owned a perfectly good house wasn't lost on him. He sat on the edge of the generic bed, staring at his phone, debating whether to call anyone. His sister would answer, but she'd ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. His parents would worry. His friends would want to help. But what could they do? Instead, he opened his laptop and began documenting everything. Years of software engineering had taught him the value of thorough documentation. He pulled up the deed to the house, the closing documents from 2019, bank statements showing the purchase transaction, property tax payments under his name. Then he accessed the file for the duplex on Harrison Street, the property Rachel had been unknowingly helping to pay for. That property had been a good investment. Daniel had purchased it 14 months ago for $310,000. It was a solid building in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but both units stayed consistently rented. With Rachel's help on the mortgage, the property was already generating positive cash flow. In his mind, it had been a shared investment. In Rachel's mind, it had been something else entirely. His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Did you really buy the house before we met?" Daniel typed back. "August 2019, 3 years before we met at Jason's barbecue." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "I need to see the documents. I'll send everything in the morning, or you can access the county records online. Property deed is public record." Another long pause. Then, "My mother is threatening to sue you for fraud." Daniel's jaw tightened. There's no fraud, but if she wants to waste her money on attorneys, that's her choice. This is such a mess. "I know, I'm sorry." No response after that. Daniel set the phone aside and continued his documentation. He pulled up his employment records, every pay stub from the last 2 years, his W-2 forms, his 401k statements. He documented his credit score, his investment portfolio, every piece of evidence that proved he'd never been the financial burden Margaret had painted him as. At 1 in the morning, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Milton, this is Gerald Marcus. I'm an attorney representing the Sullivan family." Daniel sat up straighter. "It's late for a business call, Mr. Marcus. Mrs. Sullivan is understandably concerned about her daughter's situation. I've advised her that your claims about property ownership can be easily verified, but she's asked me to explore all legal options regarding your relationship with Rachel." "What legal options?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I own the house. That's not in dispute." "The house isn't the issue," Gerald replied smoothly. "The issue is potential fraud in inducement regarding your marriage. If Mrs. Sullivan can demonstrate that you deceived Rachel about your financial situation in order to secure marriage—" "Stop right there," Daniel interrupted. "I never deceived anyone about anything. I didn't volunteer information, which isn't the same as lying. And I certainly didn't marry Rachel for any reason other than loving her." "That may be your perspective," Gerald said, "but Mrs. Sullivan has bank statements showing Rachel made significant financial contributions to what she believed was a shared household, while you apparently concealed substantial assets." "Rachel made mortgage payments on a rental property that I own," Daniel corrected. "A property that generates income. That's not fraud. That's a married couple building assets together." "We'll see what a judge thinks," Gerald said. "Mrs. Sullivan is prepared to pursue this aggressively. She wants to protect her daughter from someone who's clearly been taking advantage." "Gerald," Daniel said quietly, "I'm going to stop you again. You seem like a smart man, so I'm going to give you some free advice. Before you file any paperwork on Margaret Sullivan's behalf, you might want to do a bit more research into the situation. Because if you pursue a frivolous lawsuit based on your client's hurt feelings and classist assumptions, I will countersue for harassment and legal fees, and I will win." There was a pause on the line. "Is that a threat, Mr. Milton?" "It's a statement of fact. I'm a senior software engineer at Morrison Financial Technologies. I lead security protocol development for financial institutions that handle billions of dollars in transactions. I'm very good at documentation, at building airtight systems, and at exposing vulnerabilities. If you come at me legally, you'd better make sure your case is rock solid, because mine is." Another pause. "I'll convey your position to my client." "You do that. And Gerald? Tell Margaret that if she wants to help her daughter, she should let Rachel make her own decisions instead of trying to control every aspect of her life. Good night." Daniel hung up before the attorney could respond. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline. He'd never been confrontational by nature. He'd spent his whole life avoiding conflict, choosing peace over pride. But something about Margaret's absolute certainty that she was right, her complete dismissal of his worth as a person, had flipped a switch inside him. He wasn't going to be quiet anymore. He wasn't going to let assumptions go uncorrected. And he certainly wasn't going to let a wealthy woman with a superiority complex steamroll him just because she didn't like how he dressed or what car he drove. The next morning, Daniel woke early and drove to a diner near the hotel. Over coffee and eggs, he compiled all his documentation into a single file and emailed it to Rachel with a brief message. Everything you asked for, all verifiable through public records or financial institutions. I should have shared this 2 years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. His phone rang 20 minutes later. Rachel's voice sounded tired, like she hadn't slept. I've been looking at these documents all night, she said without preamble. You bought the house for cash? I'd been saving for 6 years, Daniel explained, living with roommates, driving cheap cars, eating ramen. I wanted to own something outright, no debt. It was important to me after watching my parents struggle with their business loans when I was growing up. And the duplex? I bought it last year because the rental market is strong. Both units have good tenants, a teacher and a nurse. Steady income, reliable people. I thought we could build something together, that in a few years we could buy another property, then another. Create real financial security for our future. Our future, Rachel repeated. But you never told me about any of this. How was I supposed to be part of a plan I didn't even know existed? You're right, Daniel admitted. I screwed up. I got so caught up in protecting myself from gold diggers that I turned into something worse, someone who deceived his own wife. Rachel was quiet for a moment. My mother called me 17 times last night. She's convinced you're some kind of con artist who targeted me specifically. Do you believe that? I don't know what to believe, Rachel said. 2 days ago, I thought I knew my husband. Now I'm finding out he's been living this whole secret financial life. The Daniel I married shopped at thrift stores and suggested we split pizza for dinner to save money. I still do those things, Daniel said. That wasn't an act, Rachel. I genuinely enjoy living simply. The money isn't about buying expensive things. It's about security, about knowing I can handle emergencies, about building something that lasts. But you let me worry about money. Do you know how many nights I've laid awake doing calculations in my head, figuring out how we'd afford things? I've been putting off dental work because I thought we needed to save for house repairs. House repairs on your house that you own and could easily afford. Daniel closed his eyes. Each example was another knife twist, another reminder of how badly he'd miscalculated. You're right. I'm sorry. I don't have a good excuse. My mother wants me to file for divorce, Rachel said. She says this is financial abuse, that you've been controlling me through deception. Is that what you want? I don't know, Rachel's voice cracked. I'm so angry at you, Daniel, but I'm also angry at myself for not asking more questions, for making assumptions. And I'm furious with my mother for how she treated you last night. She had no right to slap you, no right to threaten you in front of our friends. No, Daniel agreed. She didn't. But she's not wrong that you deceived me, Rachel continued. Maybe not legally, maybe not technically, but you let me believe a lie about our life for 2 years. How do I trust you after that? Daniel didn't have an answer. The diner bustled around him, servers refilling coffee, families ordering breakfast, normal people having normal Saturday mornings. His life felt anything but normal. What do you need from me? He asked finally. What would help? Space, Rachel said immediately. I need time to think without you or my mother or anyone else influencing me. I'm going to stay with my friend Melissa for a few days. Okay, Daniel said. I'll stay at the hotel. You can have the house. It's your house, Rachel said, and there was something bitter in her tone. That's the whole problem, isn't it? It was never our house. It was always yours, and I was just… What? A tenant? A guest? A partner, Daniel insisted. Rachel, please understand. I need to go, she cut him off. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk more. She hung up. Daniel stared at his phone, then at his half-eaten breakfast. He'd lost his appetite. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Daniel should do next. Daniel spent Saturday gathering more evidence. He visited his accountant, his own father actually, at the Milton family firm in Queens. His mother had made lunch and they'd sat in the small office break room while Daniel explained the situation. You should have told her from the beginning, his mother said, shaking her head. Secrets in a marriage are poison. I know, Ma. But this woman, this mother-in-law, his father added, adjusting his glasses, she has no legal ground to stand on. You own property purchased before marriage. Rachel's contributions to the other property could be considered marital assets, yes, but that works in her favor, not against you. Margaret doesn't care about what's legal, Daniel said. She cares about being right, about proving I'm not good enough for her daughter. His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Her opinion doesn't matter. Rachel's opinion matters. Do you love your wife? Yes. Then fight for her, not against the mother, not to prove you have money. Fight to show Rachel who you really are, all of who you are. His father printed out financial statements going back 5 years. Documentation, he said. Your mother is right about the emotional side, but you also need to protect yourself legally. This Margaret sounds like someone who doesn't give up easily. He was right. That afternoon, Daniel received an email from Gerald Marcus outlining the Sullivan family's legal position. It was a fishing expedition full of phrases like potential fraud and financial manipulation and full accounting of assets. The letter demanded Daniel provide complete financial disclosure and suggested that Rachel was entitled to half the value of the house since she'd been maintaining it during their marriage. Daniel forwarded the email to his own attorney, a woman named Sarah Kim, who specialized in family law. They'd spoken briefly on the phone that morning, and she'd agreed to review his case. An hour after sending the email, she called back. "This is harassment," Sarah said bluntly. "Gerald Marcus knows he doesn't have a case. He's trying to intimidate you into a settlement." "Will it work?" "That depends on you. How much are you willing to fight?" Daniel thought about Margaret's face when she'd slapped him, her absolute certainty that he was worthless, her conviction that he'd been taking advantage of her daughter. "All the way," he said. "I'm willing to fight all the way." "Good," Sarah replied, "because here's what's going to happen. They're going to keep escalating, trying to find something that sticks. They'll paint you as a liar, a manipulator, whatever narrative serves their purpose. But we have truth and documentation on our side. Every property purchase is documented. Every tax payment, every mortgage record. You haven't done anything illegal or even unethical. You just made some poor communication choices in your marriage." "Poor communication choices," Daniel repeated. "That's a nice way of putting it." "It's the accurate way of putting it," Sarah corrected. "You didn't steal from Rachel. You didn't forge documents or hide debt or commit fraud. You bought property before you met her and continued building assets during your marriage. The duplex situation actually works in your favor. You included her in building wealth, even if she didn't realize it." "Tell that to Rachel," Daniel muttered. "I can't fix your marriage," Sarah said. "That's between you and your wife. But I can make sure Margaret Sullivan doesn't weaponize the legal system against you. I'll draft a response to Gerald that makes our position crystal clear. And Daniel, stop responding to them directly. Everything goes through me now." After hanging up, Daniel drove back to the house, his house. Rachel's car was gone, and a note on the kitchen counter confirmed she'd left for Melissa's apartment. The anniversary dinner remnants had been cleaned up, but the dining room still felt heavy with the memory of that disastrous evening. Daniel walked through each room, seeing it with fresh eyes. The living room where he'd stripped wallpaper and refinished floors. The kitchen where he'd installed custom cabinets, learning carpentry from YouTube tutorials and his uncle's patient instruction. The master bedroom where he'd built the walk-in closet from scratch. Every inch of this house represented his labor, his vision, his dream of building something permanent, and he'd shared it with Rachel under false pretenses. Not intentionally malicious ones, but false nonetheless. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Sullivan, Margaret's sister. We need to talk." Daniel almost ignored it, but curiosity won out. "About what?" "About resolving this situation before it destroys your marriage and our family. Can we meet?" 20 minutes later, Daniel sat across from Patricia at a Starbucks near White Plains. She was younger than Margaret, maybe 55, with kinder eyes and a less severe demeanor. "I'm not here officially," Patricia said, stirring her latte. "Margaret doesn't know I'm talking to you, but I've known my sister for 55 years, and I've watched her do this before." "Do what?" "Decide someone isn't good enough and then wage war to prove herself right. She did it with my first husband. Drove him away with constant criticism until he left. Turned out he was a good man. I was just too young to stand up to her." Daniel said nothing, waiting. She's doing the same thing to you, Patricia continued. From the moment she met you, she decided you weren't suitable for Rachel. Not because of who you are, but because of what you represent. Someone she can't control or impress with her wealth. She certainly tried to control me last night, Daniel said dryly. That slap was inexcusable, Patricia said firmly. I told her as much. But Margaret doesn't apologize. She doubles down. And right now she's doubling down on the narrative that you're a con artist who targeted her daughter. Why are you telling me this? Patricia met his eyes. Because Rachel is miserable. She called me this morning, crying, saying she doesn't know what's real anymore. She loves you, Daniel, but she's terrified of being manipulated, and Margaret is feeding that fear every chance she gets. I didn't manipulate her, Daniel said quietly. I just didn't correct her assumptions. I know. I've seen the documents Rachel showed me. You bought that house years before you met her. You've been building a good life, working hard, saving smart. There's nothing sinister about any of it except the lack of communication. So what do you suggest? Stop fighting Margaret head on, Patricia said. You can't win that battle. She's too stubborn, too proud. Instead, focus on Rachel. Show her who you really are, all of you, including the parts you were afraid to share. Let her make her own choice without her mother's interference. How do I do that when Margaret's attorney is threatening legal action? Patricia smiled slightly. Gerald Marcus is a corporate attorney who handles business contracts. Margaret hired him because he's intimidating, not because he knows anything about family law. He's already out of his depth, and any competent family attorney will eat him alive. Trust your own lawyer and ignore Margaret's bluster. She slapped me in front of witnesses, Daniel pointed out. I could press charges. You could, Patricia agreed. But would that help you get Rachel back? Or would it just prove Margaret's point that you're vindictive? Daniel considered this. She was right. Going after Margaret legally might feel satisfying, but it would drive Rachel further away. And despite everything, despite the anger and hurt, Daniel still wanted his marriage to survive. Rachel needs to see the rental property, Patricia said. The duplex you've been paying for together. Let her meet the tenants. See the investment as real and tangible. Right now, it's just numbers on paper. Make it concrete. It was good advice. Daniel thanked Patricia and headed home to make arrangements. Sunday morning, he texted Rachel, I'd like to show you the Harrison Street property, the one you've been helping me pay for. Would you be willing to meet me there? Just us. No one else. An hour passed before she responded. What time? They met at the duplex at 2 in the afternoon. It was a nice building, well-maintained, with a small front yard and fresh paint. Rachel pulled up in her Toyota Camry and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. This is it? She asked. This is it, Daniel confirmed. Built in 1985, solid construction. I bought it because the location is good and the rental market is strong. Both tenants have been here about a year. They walked around the property. Daniel pointed out the new roof he'd installed last spring, the updated electrical panel, the landscaping he'd done himself. Rachel listened quietly, her expression unreadable. The tenant on the left is Sarah Martinez, Daniel said. She's a third-grade teacher at the elementary school on Maple Street. Pays $1,200 a month. The tenant on the right is James Cooper, a nurse at Westchester Medical Center. He pays $1,300. Total monthly income, $2,500. And the mortgage? $1,900 a month. After property taxes and insurance, we net about $300 monthly. Not huge, but it's positive cash flow and building equity. In 10 years, this property will be worth significantly more. Rachel walked up to the porch, running her hand along the railing. You built this? The railing, yes. The original was rotting. I replaced it with composite materials that won't decay. You never told me you could do that kind of work. I learned from my uncle, Daniel said. He taught me basic construction when I was a teenager. Said every man should know how to fix things in his own home. Rachel turned to face him. Your home, not our home. That's what I keep coming back to. Everything has been yours, Daniel. The house, this property, the decisions. Where was I in any of it? You were everywhere, Daniel insisted. Every choice I made, I was thinking about our future. About the family we'd have someday, the security we'd build together. I just did a terrible job of communicating that. Why? Rachel demanded. Why was it so hard to just tell me the truth? Daniel leaned against the porch railing, choosing his words carefully. Because the last woman I dated before you, her name was Vanessa. We'd been together for 8 months when I told her I'd bought a house. She moved in 2 weeks later without asking. Started redecorating, throwing out my things, planning renovations. When I said I wasn't ready to merge our lives that completely, she accused me of leading her on. Said I'd been wasting her time if I wasn't serious about our future. I'm not Vanessa, Rachel said quietly. I know, but I was so scared of repeating that pattern that I overcorrected. I hid everything instead of sharing it. And in doing so, I hurt you worse than Vanessa ever hurt me. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm October afternoon. My mother thinks you're a con artist. She's convinced you targeted me because of my family's money. Do you believe that? No, Rachel said immediately. I might be angry, but I'm not stupid. You had your own money before we ever met. If you were after the Sullivan fortune, you would have acted completely differently. Then what do you believe? Rachel looked at him, really looked at him, studying his face like she was seeing him for the first time. I believe you're scared. I believe you've been protecting yourself for so long that you forgot how to let someone in completely. And I believe, she paused, her eyes filling with tears. I believe you love me. But I don't know if love is enough to fix this. It's a start, Daniel said. Love and honesty. No more secrets, no more assumptions. Everything on the table. Everything, everything, Daniel promised. My finances, my fears, my plans for the future. You want to know my bank balance? I'll show you. You want access to my investment accounts? Done. You want to be on the deed to the house? We'll add your name. Whatever it takes to prove that I'm committed to this marriage, to you as a full partner. Rachel wiped her eyes. I need to think about all of this, and I need to do it without my mother's voice in my head telling me what I should feel. Take all the time you need, Daniel said. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. Rachel nodded and walked back to her car. Daniel watched her drive away, then turned back to the duplex. A woman emerged from the left unit, Sarah Martinez, the teacher. She'd clearly been watching through the window. Everything okay? She asked hesitantly. Honestly? I don't know, Daniel admitted, but I'm working on it. Sarah smiled sympathetically. For what it's worth, you're a great landlord. When my toilet backed up last month, you had a plumber here within 2 hours. My last landlord would have made me wait a week. Just trying to do right by people, Daniel said. Well, keep doing it. Good landlords are rare. Daniel drove back to his house that evening with a strange sense of clarity. His marriage was hanging by a thread, his mother-in-law was waging legal warfare, and his comfortable life had exploded in the span of 48 hours. But for the first time in 2 years, everything was out in the open. No more secrets, no more carefully maintained illusions. Now came the hard part, convincing Rachel that the man she'd discovered underneath the deception was someone worth fighting for. In dealing with Margaret Sullivan, who showed no signs of backing down, his phone buzzed with an email from Sarah Kim, his attorney. The subject line read, Sullivan response received. Daniel opened it and scanned the contents. Gerald Marcus had replied to Sarah's letter with an escalation, formal notice of intent to pursue legal action for fraud in the inducement of marriage, and demanding a full accounting of Daniel's assets, with the implication that Rachel was entitled to half of everything. Daniel called Sarah immediately. Can they actually do this? They can try, Sarah said, but it's a losing case. Fraud and inducement requires proving you deliberately misled Rachel to secure marriage, and that you obtained some benefit from the marriage that you wouldn't have otherwise received. You had more assets than her going into the marriage, not less. The argument falls apart under the slightest scrutiny. So why pursue it? Intimidation, Sarah said. And ego. Margaret Sullivan is used to getting her way. She's testing you, seeing if you'll crumble under pressure or offer a settlement just to make this go away. I'm not settling, Daniel said firmly. Good. Then we'll file a response that makes our position clear. And Daniel, start documenting every interaction with Margaret or her representatives. Emails, texts, phone calls, everything. If she continues this harassment, we may need to pursue a restraining order or sue for malicious prosecution? After hanging up, Daniel sat in the silence of his house. The home he'd built with his own hands was becoming a battlefield. The marriage he'd entered with love and hope was fracturing under the weight of secrets and assumptions. And the mother-in-law who'd slapped him and called him a parasite was just getting started. But Daniel Milton had learned something important over the past 48 hours. He'd spent 2 years hiding, avoiding conflict, taking the path of least resistance, and it had gotten him exactly nowhere. In fact, it had gotten him worse than nowhere. It had cost him his wife's trust and nearly cost him his marriage. No more hiding. No more passive acceptance of other people's assumptions. If Margaret wanted a fight, she'd get one. But it would be fought with truth, documentation, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was worth. They had no idea what was coming, but Margaret Sullivan was about to learn that underestimating people had consequences, and those consequences were about to land squarely on her doorstep. The week following Rachel's visit to the duplex passed in tense silence. Daniel stayed at the house, working remotely from his home office, while Rachel remained at Melissa's apartment. They texted occasionally, brief, careful messages that avoided the deeper issues festering between them. Meanwhile, Margaret's campaign intensified. On Tuesday, Daniel received a certified letter from Gerald Marcus demanding he vacate Mrs. Rachel Sullivan's residence within 30 days. Sarah Kim responded within hours, attaching the property deed and a cease and desist notice threatening legal action for harassment. On Wednesday, Margaret called Daniel's workplace, speaking to someone in HR about concerning financial irregularities involving an employee. His manager, Tom, had called him into a virtual meeting looking uncomfortable. "I have to ask," Tom had said, "is there anything going on I should know about? We got a strange call from someone claiming to be related to you." Daniel had explained the situation calmly, professionally. Tom had listened, then shaken his head. "Family drama. I've been there. For what it's worth, your work here has been exemplary. Whatever's happening in your personal life, it doesn't affect your standing with the company. But you might want to get ahead of this before it escalates further." It was solid advice. Daniel had spent Thursday compiling a comprehensive defense package. Every financial document, every property record, every piece of evidence demonstrating his financial independence and responsibility. Sarah had reviewed it and declared it bulletproof. "If they actually file a lawsuit, which I doubt they will, we'll destroy them in discovery," she'd said. "But I think it's time we went on offense. Margaret Sullivan has committed assault, harassment, and potentially tortious interference with your employment. We have grounds for our own legal action." "Let me talk to Rachel first," Daniel had said. "I don't want to do anything that makes this worse for her." Friday evening, Rachel finally called. "Can we talk in person?" They met at a quiet restaurant in a neighboring town, neutral territory where they wouldn't run into anyone they knew. Rachel looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usual energy diminished. "My mother won't stop," she said without preamble. "She calls me every 2 hours with new theories about what you're really after. She's convinced you're planning to divorce me and take half my trust fund." "I didn't even know you had a trust fund until last month," Daniel said. "You mentioned it once, in passing." "I have 3, actually," Rachel said with a bitter smile. "My grandmother set them up. I can't access them until I'm 35, but together they're worth about $2 million. My mother thinks that's what you've been waiting for." Daniel felt a flash of anger. "That's insane. Rachel, I have my own retirement accounts worth $400,000. I have equity in 2 properties totaling over $1 million. Why would I wait years to access money that's less than what I already have?" "I know," Rachel said quietly. "I know it doesn't make sense. But my mother, she's not thinking rationally. She's made you into a villain in her mind, and now she's finding evidence to support that narrative, regardless of the facts." "What do you think?" Daniel asked. "Not your mother, you. What do you believe?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment, stirring her untouched wine. "I think you're a deeply private person who made a terrible mistake. I think you were protecting yourself from past hurt, and in doing so, you hurt me. I don't think you're a con artist or a gold digger. I think you're just scared." "I am scared," Daniel admitted. "I'm terrified of losing you. But I'm also tired of letting fear dictate my choices. So I'm going to tell you everything. Not because I have to, but because you deserve to know who you married. Over the next hour, Daniel laid out his entire financial life. He showed Rachel his investment portfolio, his retirement accounts, his savings. He explained how he'd learned to invest from his father, how he'd lived frugally through his 20s to build a foundation. He told her about the rental property plan, how he'd envisioned eventually owning 5 or 6 properties, creating passive income that would let them both work less and spend more time with their future children. I wanted to build something real, he said, not just wealth for the sake of wealth, but security, freedom, options. And I wanted to build it with you. I just went about it in the worst possible way. Rachel listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "Why didn't you just tell me this on our first date? Hi, I'm Daniel. I own a house and have a decent nest egg." What was so hard about that? Because Vanessa wasn't the only one, Daniel confessed. In college, I dated a woman named Jessica. When she found out my parents owned a business, she suddenly needed loans all the time. Then there was Amy, who borrowed $5,000 to help her sick mother and disappeared. I've been burned enough times that I started hiding everything by default. So you assumed I'd be like them? No, Daniel said firmly. If I thought that, I wouldn't have married you. But by the time I realized you weren't like them, I was already so deep into the deception that I didn't know how to come clean without destroying everything. Rachel set down her wine glass. You should have trusted me. You should have given me the chance to prove I loved you for you, not your money. You're right, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Rachel. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Daniel's situation. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Rachel said, "My mother is planning to file a lawsuit next week. She's convinced Gerald Marcus that there's a case for fraud, and she's pressuring me to file for divorce simultaneously so we can clean you out before you hide more assets." "Are you going to divorce me?" Daniel asked, his heart pounding. "I don't know," Rachel said honestly. "I love you, Daniel, but I don't know if I can trust you again. And I don't know how to have a marriage with my mother constantly interfering and you constantly holding back information." "What if we dealt with both problems?" Daniel suggested. "What if we set boundaries with your mother and committed to complete transparency with each other?" "How do you set boundaries with someone like Margaret Sullivan?" Rachel asked with a hollow laugh. "She doesn't acknowledge boundaries. She just bulldozes through them." "Then we build a wall instead of a boundary," Daniel said, "with legal backing if necessary." Rachel looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means your mother assaulted me in front of witnesses. She's harassed my workplace. She's threatened frivolous legal action. My attorney says we have grounds for a restraining order and a countersuit. I've been holding back because I didn't want to hurt you. But Rachel, she's not going to stop unless she's forced to stop." Rachel's face went pale. "You want to sue my mother?" "I want her to leave us alone," Daniel corrected. "If a cease and desist letter does that, great. If we need to go further, I will, because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being treated like a criminal in my own home by someone who's decided I'm not good enough without even trying to know me." "She's my mother," Rachel whispered. "I know. And I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to let me defend myself from someone who's actively trying to destroy my reputation and livelihood. Your mother doesn't get a free pass to commit assault and harassment just because she's family." Rachel stood up abruptly. "I need air." They walked outside, the cool November evening sharp after the warmth of the restaurant. Rachel leaned against the building, her breath forming small clouds in the air. "Everything is falling apart," she said. "My marriage, my relationship with my mother, my sense of reality. 2 weeks ago, I thought I had my life figured out. Now I don't know what's real anymore." Daniel stood beside her, not touching, giving her space. "I know what's real. My love for you is real. My commitment to our marriage is real. My desire to build a life with you. That's real too. The only thing that wasn't real was the financial picture I let you believe. Everything else, every conversation, every moment, that was authentic." "Was it?" Rachel challenged. "Because I remember conversations where I worried about money and you said nothing. I remember times I suggested we postpone things we wanted because of cost, and you just agreed. That doesn't feel authentic. That feels like lying by omission. It was, Daniel admitted, and I hate that I did that to you. But Rachel, I'm not perfect. I made mistakes. Big ones. The question is whether those mistakes are unforgivable or whether we can work through them together. Rachel turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to spend my life wondering what else you're not telling me. Then let's make a deal, Daniel proposed. Complete transparency from here on out. Any question you have, I answer honestly. Any concern about my mother's interference, we address as a team. No more secrets, no more avoiding difficult conversations. And my mother gets one chance to apologize and back off. If she doesn't take it, we pursue legal protections. Not to hurt her, but to protect us. Rachel considered this. She'll never apologize. You don't know her like I do. Margaret Sullivan has never apologized for anything in her life. Then she'll face the consequences of that choice, Daniel said quietly. The next day, Saturday, Daniel received an unexpected text from Patricia. Family dinner at Margaret's house tonight. You should come. Trust me. Daniel showed the message to Rachel, who'd agreed to come back to the house to continue their conversation. She frowned. That's strange. My mother usually plans these things weeks in advance. Do you want to go? Daniel asked. I don't know if it's a good idea. Patricia said to trust her. She's been the only reasonable one in your family so far. Rachel bit her lip, then nodded. Okay, but if my mother starts in on you again, we're leaving immediately. They arrived at Margaret's estate in Connecticut at 7 that evening. The sprawling colonial sat on 3 acres, with a circular driveway and meticulously maintained gardens. A maid answered the door and led them to the dining room, where Margaret, Patricia, and Gerald Marcus sat waiting. Daniel's guard went up immediately. You didn't mention your attorney would be here, he said to Patricia. Sit down, please, Patricia said calmly. Everyone needs to hear this. Margaret's face was stony, her jaw set. She looked at Daniel like he was something unpleasant she'd discovered on her shoe. Rachel took Daniel's hand, the first time she'd initiated physical contact since the anniversary dinner, and they sat together across from Margaret. I asked Gerald to compile a full analysis of the situation, Patricia began, not to pursue legal action, but to get objective facts. Gerald, would you share what you found? The attorney cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. After reviewing all the documentation provided by Mr. Milton and his attorney, as well as public records and financial statements, I've concluded that there is no viable case for fraud, financial abuse, or any other legal wrongdoing. Margaret's face reddened. That's not what you said on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I was working with incomplete information, Gerald interrupted. Mrs. Sullivan, your son-in-law purchased his primary residence 3 years before meeting your daughter, using his own funds accumulated through legitimate employment. He has consistently paid all property taxes, maintenance, and associated costs from his own accounts. There is no evidence of financial manipulation or deception in the legal sense. But he let Rachel pay for. He included her in paying the mortgage on a separate investment property that generates rental income, Gerald continued. That property is appreciating in value and producing positive cash flow. From a legal standpoint, this is a marital asset that benefits both parties. It's actually quite advantageous for your daughter. Margaret's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Daniel felt Rachel's hand tighten around his. Furthermore, Gerald said, his tone growing firmer, Mr. Milton has documented several instances of harassment that could form the basis for legal action against you, Mrs. Sullivan. The assault in front of witnesses, the calls to his workplace, the threats of eviction from property he legally owns. These are actionable items. His attorney has been quite restrained in not pursuing them, but that restraint should not be mistaken for weakness. This is ridiculous, Margaret snapped. He manipulated my daughter. No, Patricia interrupted. He failed to communicate clearly with his wife. That's a marriage problem, not a legal problem, and certainly not something that justifies your behavior, Margaret. Margaret turned on her sister. You're taking his side? I'm taking reality's side, Patricia said. I've watched you do this before. You decide someone isn't good enough, And then you twist every fact to support that conclusion. But this time, you're wrong, and your crusade is driving your daughter away. Everyone looked at Rachel, who'd been silent until now. She released Daniel's hand and stood up, facing her mother. Mom, I love you, but Aunt Patricia is right. You're so convinced Daniel is trying to take advantage of me that you can't see what's actually happening. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he should have been more honest about his finances. But he's not a con artist, and he's not using me. He's just a man who was scared and made some bad decisions. Rachel, sweetheart, Margaret started. I'm not finished, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tremor Daniel could hear underneath. You slapped my husband in front of our friends. You threatened him in his own home. You called his workplace to try to get him fired. Those are not the actions of someone protecting me. Those are the actions of someone who needs to control everything and everyone around her. Margaret's face went white. How dare you? I dare because I'm 30 years old and I'm done letting you make decisions for me, Rachel said. I'm done pretending I need your approval for my life choices, and I'm done watching you treat the man I married like he's garbage just because he doesn't fit your definition of suitable. The room fell silent. Daniel had never seen Rachel stand up to her mother like this. Margaret looked genuinely shocked, as if one of her decorative vases had suddenly started talking back. I raised you better than this, Margaret said finally, her voice icy. You raised me to be independent and strong, Rachel countered. I'm being both. You just don't like it because I'm not being independent and strong in the way you want. Patricia cleared her throat. Margaret, Gerald has advised, and I agree, that you should offer a formal apology to Daniel and cease all legal threats. Continuing down this path will only result in a lawsuit you'll lose and further damage to your relationship with Rachel. I'm not apologizing to him, Margaret said flatly. Then you're choosing pride over your daughter, Patricia said, because Rachel has made it clear she won't tolerate your continued harassment of her husband. Everyone looked at Rachel again. She took a deep breath. Mom, if you can't accept my marriage and treat Daniel with basic respect, then we're done. I won't come to family dinners. I won't answer your calls. You'll be choosing to exclude yourself from my life, from your future grandchildren's lives, because you can't admit you were wrong about someone. Margaret's facade cracked slightly. Rachel, you're being manipulated. I'm making a choice, Rachel interrupted. The same choice you're making right now. You can apologize, back off, and work on repairing our relationship. Or you can double down on your crusade and lose me. Those are your options. The silence stretched out. Daniel watched emotions flicker across Margaret's face. Anger, disbelief, fear, and finally, something that might have been understanding. She looked at Gerald, who nodded slightly, then at Patricia, who raised her eyebrows expectantly. Finally, Margaret turned to Daniel. The words seemed to physically pain her. I may have overreacted to the situation. That's not an apology, Rachel said firmly. Margaret's jaw clenched. I apologize for the physical altercation at your anniversary dinner, and for any other actions that were excessive in their execution. It was the worst apology Daniel had ever heard, delivered with all the warmth of a legal deposition, but it was an apology nonetheless, and from someone like Margaret Sullivan, it was probably the best they'd get. Thank you, Daniel said simply. And for the record, I love your daughter. I made mistakes in how I communicated with her, but my intentions were never malicious. I hope we can move forward from here with mutual respect. Margaret nodded stiffly, then stood and left the room. They could hear her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. Patricia sighed. That went better than I expected, honestly. Give her time. Margaret doesn't handle being wrong very gracefully, but she loves Rachel more than her pride. Eventually, Gerald packed up his briefcase. I'll send a formal letter to your attorney, Mr. Milton, confirming that the Sullivan family will not be pursuing any legal action. And for what it's worth, you seem like a good man who made some understandable mistakes. I hope you and Rachel can work things out. After Gerald and Patricia left, Daniel and Rachel sat alone in Margaret's formal dining room, surrounded by expensive china and oil paintings of Sullivan ancestors. That was terrifying, Rachel said. You were incredible, Daniel replied. I've never seen you stand up to her like that. I've never had to, Rachel said. She's always been supportive, Or at least I thought she was. But watching her attack you, seeing how quickly she turned cruel, it made me realize she's been controlling, not supportive. There's a difference. What happens now? Daniel asked. Rachel turned to him. Now we figure out if we can fix our marriage. And Daniel, I need you to understand something. If we're going to make this work, you can never hide things from me again. Not money, not fears, not anything. I need a partner who trusts me enough to be fully honest, even when it's uncomfortable. I promise, Daniel said. Complete transparency, starting now. What do you want to know? They talked until midnight, still sitting in Margaret's dining room. Daniel answered every question Rachel had about his finances, his past relationships, his fears and insecurities. Rachel shared her own struggles, the pressure of being a Sullivan, the expectations she'd grown up with, the relief she'd felt when she thought she'd found someone who wanted her for herself rather than her family name. That's why I fell in love with you, Rachel admitted. You never seemed impressed by the Sullivan money or connections. You liked me for me, but now I understand. You weren't impressed because you had your own money, and that feels, I don't know, like I was fooling myself about our dynamic. You weren't fooling yourself, Daniel insisted. I did like you for you. The money thing was irrelevant to me because I wasn't looking for someone to support me. I was looking for someone to partner with, to build a life with. Someone who was genuine and kind and funny. That's who you were at Jason's barbecue, and that's who you still are. But you let me feel like I was the responsible one, the provider. That was real to me, even if it wasn't true. It was partly true, Daniel said. You are responsible. You do contribute. The fact that I had money doesn't diminish what you brought to our marriage. You brought emotional intelligence, social connections, creativity. You made our house a home in ways that had nothing to do with money? Rachel smiled slightly. You're just saying that. I'm not. Rachel, I can buy and renovate houses all day long, but I couldn't plan a dinner party, or remember everyone's birthdays, or know exactly what to say to make someone feel welcome. You do all of that effortlessly. That's valuable. That matters. They drove home together that night, back to the house that was legally Daniel's, but had become theirs through 2 years of shared life. Rachel didn't stay at Melissa's. She came inside, and they sat up talking until 3 in the morning, discussing boundaries with Margaret, plans for their financial future, and what complete transparency would actually look like in practice. We should probably see a marriage counselor, Rachel suggested, to work through the trust issues. I agree, Daniel said, and for what it's worth, I want to add your name to the house deed. Not because I have to, but because I want to. This is our home, Rachel. It should reflect that legally. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to do that. I want to. I should have offered years ago. They finally fell asleep on the couch, exhausted but together. The next morning, Daniel woke to find Rachel already up, making coffee in the kitchen he'd renovated. She handed him a mug and smiled, tentative but genuine. I'm still hurt, she said. And it's going to take time to fully trust you again. But I want to try. I want to save our marriage. So do I, Daniel said. Whatever it takes. Over the following weeks, they rebuilt their relationship piece by piece. They found a marriage counselor who specialized in trust issues and communication. They opened a joint bank account and reviewed all their finances together, creating a shared budget and investment strategy. Rachel met with both sets of tenants at the duplex and started learning about property management. Daniel taught her how to read financial statements and evaluate real estate investments. Margaret kept her distance, though Patricia reported that she was coming around slowly. Rachel set firm boundaries. They would attend family dinners once a month, but Margaret was not allowed to comment on Daniel's career, finances, or suitability as a husband. The first dinner after the confrontation had been tense, but Margaret had bitten her tongue and behaved civilly. It was progress. 3 months later, on a cold February evening, Daniel came home from work to find Rachel sitting at the dining room table with a stack of papers. What's all this? He asked. I've been doing research, Rachel said, her eyes bright with excitement. There's a triplex for sale on Willow Street. 3 units, need some work, but the location is perfect. I ran the numbers, and with the rent from the other units, we could live in 1 unit basically for free while building equity. Daniel sat down beside her, looking over the documents. You want to move out of this house? Not permanently, Rachel clarified, but hear me out. We could rent out this house. It would generate at least $3,000 a month, maybe more. Live in the triplex while we renovate it, then decide whether to keep living there or move back here and rent all 3 units. Either way, we'd be building our portfolio faster. You've really thought about this, Daniel said, impressed. I have. And Daniel? I want to do this together, as actual partners this time. I'll manage the renovations on the triplex while you handle the financial side. We'll make decisions together, share the work together, build something together. For real this time. Daniel pulled her into a hug. I love that idea, and I love you. I love you too, Rachel said, even though you're an idiot who hid money from his wife for 2 years. Fair assessment, Daniel laughed. They bought the triplex that spring. Rachel quit her marketing job to focus on property management full-time, discovering a talent for renovation planning and tenant relations. Daniel continued his work as a software engineer, but with Rachel handling the properties, he found more time for the work he actually enjoyed, rather than just the work that paid well. Margaret eventually came to one of their renovation projects, walking through the half-finished triplex with a critical eye. Daniel braced himself for criticism, but instead she'd surprised him. You're doing good work here, she'd said grudgingly. Rachel seems happy. She is, Daniel had replied. We both are. Margaret had nodded, then after a long pause, I was wrong about you, not completely wrong. You should have been honest from the start, but wrong about your character. You're good for my daughter. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. It was a better apology than the one she'd given at the family dinner. Daniel had accepted it gracefully and slowly. Over months of awkward family dinners and gradual thawing, Margaret had become something approaching a supportive mother-in-law. She still had her moments of superiority and control, but Rachel had learned to set boundaries and Margaret had learned to respect them. 2 years after that disastrous anniversary dinner, Daniel and Rachel hosted a party to celebrate their 4th wedding anniversary. This time, the gathering was at their newly renovated triplex, where they'd decided to make their permanent home. Friends, family, and even Margaret gathered on the rooftop deck Daniel had built overlooking the city. As Daniel watched Rachel laugh with their guests, he reflected on how far they'd come. The journey had been painful, marked by broken trust and difficult conversations, but they'd emerged stronger, more honest, and more genuinely partnered than they'd ever been when he was hiding his financial life. Patricia found him standing alone by the railing. Quite a difference from that last anniversary dinner. Just a bit, Daniel agreed. You know, I never doubted you, Patricia said. Not really. I've known enough truly bad men to recognize a good one having a bad moment. You just needed to trust your wife enough to show her who you really were. I learned that the hard way, Daniel said. But I learned it. Rachel joined them, slipping her hand into Daniel's. What are you two conspiring about? Just discussing how far you've come, Patricia said with a smile. Both of you. After Patricia walked away, Rachel leaned against Daniel. You know what I realized? When we first met, I fell in love with who I thought you were. A regular guy living paycheck to paycheck, someone I could relate to. But now I love who you actually are. A careful planner, a skilled builder, someone who thinks 3 steps ahead. The real you is even better than the version I invented. The real you is pretty spectacular too, Daniel replied. Turns out the Sullivan Princess is actually a talented property developer with a gift for design and a surprisingly firm hand with difficult contractors. Rachel laughed. Life is weird, isn't it? If my mother hadn't slapped you and demanded those house keys, we might have gone on forever with you hiding your finances and me feeling like I was holding everything together. Sometimes the worst moments force us to face truths we've been avoiding, Daniel said. Is that going to be your deep philosophical takeaway from all this? Rachel teased. Maybe, Daniel smiled. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the lesson is that love without honesty is just a beautiful lie. And beautiful lies eventually crumble under their own weight. But the truth, even when it's messy and imperfect, can actually hold 2 people together. Rachel kissed him. I like that better. Less philosophy, more truth. As the party continued around them, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them here. The deception that had nearly destroyed his marriage had ultimately saved it by forcing them both to be completely honest. Margaret's attempt to prove him unworthy had backfired, exposing her own controlling nature and strengthening Rachel's independence. And the house keys that Margaret had demanded, the ones that had sparked this whole crisis, were now attached to a key ring with 5 properties, representing a future Daniel and Rachel were building together, in full transparency and partnership. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting people face the consequences of their own actions, while you quietly build the life you always wanted. And sometimes the greatest victory is not in proving someone wrong, but in proving yourself right through the choices you make afterward. Daniel had learned that real security doesn't come from hiding who you are. It comes from finding someone who loves all of you, the assets and the insecurities, the strengths and the mistakes, and choosing to build something real together, one honest conversation at a time. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.